Good morning, dear colleagues. It's my great pleasure to open this first annual research conference, which we organized jointly with Narodny Bank Polski and with the support of the government of Canada and Kyiv School of Economics. And of course, I am very happy that all of you already here. It's an absolutely great event, and I hope we will see today a very high level of discussion in our audience. Together with our prominent speakers from different countries, we are here today to discuss a wide range of knowledges and ideas which help us to address challenges in the area of central banking in the future. Before I give the floor to our notable panelists, let me first make a few remarks that I hope will set the stage of our upcoming discussion. We have a few full days of discussion of a wide range of central banks' issues and challenges. At the first glance, all this discussion looks like internal business of central banks. But because central banks are guardians of macroeconomic and financial stability, all our decisions have very serious implications. It's tons of microphones. It's even occupied all my territory, you know. All our decisions have a serious implication for real economy and our population. And that's why we need an extensive discussion of the role and tools of the central banks nowadays. The world is changing fast, and central banks have to transform also with impressive speed, because we need to keep a rapidly expanding and increasingly complex economic processes in financial markets. The Great Recession of 2008 and 2009 shows that traditional set of central bank tools might be insufficient to overcome the crisis. Instead, over the past 10 years, central banks have developed new ammunitions and new approaches, from unconventional monetary policy tool to macroprudential supervision. And first of all, take a look at monetary policy. In the past, the theory started that central banks facing continuing deflation wasn't trapped. The conventional wisdom was the central bank could not set an interest rate below zero. However, it turns that central bank actually can do that. Moreover, central banks of developed countries have introduced even more unconventional tools right now for discussion. It's new, idea among central bankers right now. It's so-called helicopter money. And before it was rather theoretical concept, and right now some central banks start even to discuss this idea. In addition, some central banks have returned to very specific exchange rate practices. For instance, Czech National Bank actively use their exchange rate commitments, and Swedish Central Bank promised to use foreign exchange intervention to safeguard the low inflation. All these unconventional tools help central banks to achieve their target to a certain extent, but in the same time they created foundation for problems of another kind. Let me name just a few of them. As a result of extremely generous of central banks, global economy has become over-dependent on stimulus provided by all central banks around the world, from zero or negative interest rate to quantitative and even qualitative easing. Today, a modern central bank is not only a lender of last resort, but also a purchaser of last resort of sovereign and corporate bonds. For example, you know that the European Central Bank right now looks like even underwriter of some sovereign debt in Europe. And frankly speaking, central banks have become even a market makers of last resort. It's absolutely unique universe in the world. Having been introduced all these emergency measures, QE right now become a permanent exercise. Now it is a question mark about maybe it should be not anymore like emergency kit tool. Maybe it's right now all this QE exercise, it's just a normal practices for all central banks, and that's why today of our conference I think we will discuss all these matters. And because all this absolutely new idea of new monetary policy regime from negative or zero interest rate to this QE exercises, all of that created absolutely not maybe proportional demand for any assets, because zero or negative interest rate has also induced distortion of all fundamental approach of fair value principles, because everybody knows in this audience what does it mean NPV, net present value of any cash flows. And when you use negative interest rate in your NPV formulas, you immediately will see some recession or absolutely not adequate valuation of any assets. That's why you know that markets are now overvalued and overcrowded. Debt is shifting from private sector to public sector, and that's why maybe it's time for all of us to consider new monetary regime idea. It's not anymore even inflation targeting, it's maybe idea of asset bubble targeting, because right now it's a very, very serious issue around the world. It's not a secret that as a result of crisis, investors have lost their confidence not only in all these credit agencies. Investors lost their confidence even with some big four auditors, unfortunately. And right now we see that investors are losing confidence even in banking supervision of central banks. And sometimes it's really considers that central banks have no any grip anymore over the markets, but it's about more monetary issues, and of course all this problem with supervision. Right now it's a very serious problem which all central banks right now face around the world. And as we see right now, all these negative expectations of market, no confidence to all this supervision capacity of central banks, create some not a normal situation, I think, because if you observe right now price to book ratio of European banks, you will see that average price to book ratio of European banks right now is 0.4. Means it's just 40% of their book value. I think it's absolutely not acceptable. Of course, first of all, it's like expectations that negative interest rate will not bring enough profit to this institution, but more to that, it's still not a reliance or financials of this particular institution. And the global crisis of 2008 and 2009, as well as the debt crisis in EU also change a perception of main objective of central banks' economic policy. Before the crisis, the common wisdom was that the central bank should focus on price stability. This approach made regulators blind to the fact that the financial sector has accumulated systemic imbalances at related risks. Since neither price stability nor conventional banking supervision ensure that systemic financial sector risks are prevented. In particular, successful implementation of basic rules on capital and liquidity does not ensure that the absence of systemic financial sector risk. So, our lessons learned from 2007-2008 crisis: price stability does not guarantee a financial stability. Therefore, we need to build a modern banking supervision. First of all, it's risk-based and forward-looking supervision, and of course, we should put more emphasis on macroprudential supervision based on the analysis of systemic risk and aim at preventing financial crisis. Now, a modern central bank has a dual mandate, not even dual, a triple mandate: price stability, financial stability, and economic stability. However, there is still no clear answer how all these three components would and could coexist within a mandate of modern central bank. And I think it should be a topic of our discussion during our conference about all this, how all these three mandates fit together. The management tools for capital flow have changed a lot compared to previous pre-crisis practices as well. Recently, a large number of central banks have added administrative tools to managing capital flow as their main toolkit. Overall mood in central banking literature means that to be supportive to them, despite the trend before the global financial crisis, because it was absolutely opposite. And next item which we will discuss during this conference is technology. Because technology is also changing the nature of banking system. Together with the high capital cost and excessive regulation, you know that it shifts banking business to so-called shadow banking. And now, for us, for central bankers, all this shadow banking, it's, I can tell you, uncharted territory, especially for us here in Ukraine. Virtual currencies, blockchain applications, crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending. I only counted you all these new so-called high-tech technologies, fintech technology. My main question now, is shadow banking is a new mainstream banking? That could the way to increase efficiency in innovation of new business model of banking sector? All this fintech just a new fashion trend. I'd like, of course, and we will have a discussion in one of our panel, and I'd like to see the answer from our respected audience about all of that. Because if it's new stream of main banking, it means that we should, like central bankers, like a regulator, to switch our mind. Because open-minded approach to all this innovation, I think it's an absolutely right way for us, for central bankers today. And very interesting issues. All above that bring us to very interesting issues. Central banks' earnings right now evaporating day by day. And under the low yield environment, excessive liquidity and lower demand for cash, central banks, as a buyer of last resort of troubled assets, you know, created their problem in their balance sheet. So, you know, it's therefore the first idea for all central bankers should be to protect the balance sheet of central banks of any bad assets, and then to work towards greater efficiency in managing our cost because of very limited income opportunities down the road. It's time to have a proactive approach to automation of central banking function, and we will discuss all this issue because you know that analytical tools within a central bank and could be, frankly speaking, developed properly. Unfortunately, I do not see right now anyone very maybe advanced IT central bank in the world, because it's right now it's more like a territory for all these fintech new technology projects, and unfortunately it's not in a central bank. That's why it's very interesting to discuss how this technology could help us to build proper regulation, because all these central banks have absolutely unique big data, all of them. And believe me, in Central Bank of Ukraine, I see such a kind of possibilities to analyze this big data. That it's, but I do not still see the tools how we can do that, and I do not see automatization proper how to implement all of that. And that's why profitability of central banks it's also an issue right now. That's why to better to be prepared to manage our cost properly, because tomorrow with all this very low yield environment, when your reserves, foreign exchange reserves, could generate not a profit but a loss only because of negative interest rate. We need to discuss all of that. And of course, right now, if I have time, and as far as I understand, I have 10 minutes time, yes? I will tell you our Ukrainian story, because National Bank in Ukraine could not ignore any global trends, as you understand. And during the recent years, we have been going through dramatic changes in monetary policy, banking sector supervision, and internal structure and processes. And I would like to brief you about all of that. What we had 2 years ago in Ukraine: enormous macro imbalances. Exchange rate of hryvnia, of our local currency, was pledged to US dollar. It was significant fiscal dominance. Frankly speaking, right now when we discuss, central bankers discuss all this helicopter money, we just from this helicopter money, because fiscal dominance was absolutely incredible in Ukraine. And we are very proud that we are already stopped all this fiscal dominance, and right now it's a zero in our country. Persistently poor banking oversight, high level of insider lending, systemic breakdown in governance, non-transparent ownership in the banking sector, poor anti-money laundering procedures. I only counted you some problem in the banking sector, not even all this problem around the Ukrainian economy. And all of that was a legacy of previous 20 years. And what we did, first of all, we strengthened our institutional and financial independence. We means the National Bank of Ukraine. And I believe that by strengthening the independence of the National Bank, we have reached a point of no return. Of course, it's always very difficult how irreversible are all our changes, and it's even our discussion, internal discussion within our management board. But nevertheless, we believe that the page was turned. It's irreversible. We have made clear that our goal is to build a modern, open, and independent central bank. In addition, our mandate was updated. Now the policy of the National Bank is officially aimed to ensure price stability, financial stability, and promote sustainable economic development in Ukraine. Before, it was even written in our constitution that price stability was not written price stability. It was written like stable exchange rate. You could imagine our rate was pegged to US dollar, and Ukraine, it's very small and open economy. That's why all this US dollar peg, not even corridor, but peg, it was like a killer, real killer for our economy. And what we did, in 2014, we switched to flexible exchange rate. Since then, exchange rate of hryvnia is determined only by fundamental factors, and National Bank right now is a market maker of last resort. I can tell you this way, because we introduce a lot of different administrative measures, and I explain you why. And right now, we only participate in the market to smooth volatility. We never go opposite of any fundamental trends on our exchange rate. And unfortunately, this switch to flexible exchange rate was very painful. Local currency lost 3 times of their value. But it's not only because of all these collected disbalances, it's more because of it was annexion of Crimea, because all these devils happened with us in 2014 and beginning of 2015, because it was annexion of Crimea when we lost 2 million of our population and 3.6% of our GDP. After it was annexion of our industrial part to the eastern part of Ukraine, but it was industrial part of our country, when we lost 10% of our territory, 15% of our GDP, and more to that, we lost 30% of our export revenues. And we lost all of that in one day. It's not like your exchange rate will find any equilibrium because of it's some disbalances of your current account. It's just because our industry was physically destroyed. And that's why it was absolutely difficult, a painful exercise. And we call all this situation in our country like a perfect storm. Because it was absolutely enormous, I could remember. First of all, it was a triple crisis. First of all, we had a macroeconomic crisis, severe recession, hiking inflation, sharp drop in export, widening budget deficit, because unfortunately our military expenditure was not even prepared in our budget of 2014, because all this happened unexpected. Nobody could even expect that something like this could happen between Russia and Ukraine in 2014. It was shock for everybody. Secondly, it was accompanied by the currency crisis, wide balance of payment deficit, severe confidence crisis, multiple exchange rate practices, and shadow foreign exchange market. We had all of that in 2014. And thirdly, it was followed by the banking crisis. Bank run, interest rate spike, credit crunch, mounting NPLs, capital shortage, disastrous corporate governance. Because, as I counted you before, it was 20 years of collected disbalances, macroeconomic disbalances in our country. But plus to that, it's happened all this absolutely awful situation, because it was a real bloody war in our territory. And therefore we had to react quickly, and we dramatically increased our key policy rate, and we introduced absolutely draconic administrative measures. And of course, all these administrative measures in the foreign exchange market was not popular among our business, among our population, but finally we stabilized the situation in our country. And thanks to all international support, IMF, World Bank, EBRD, and other international bilateral support of other central banks who provided us with possibility to conclude some swap lines, we, frankly speaking, stabilized the situation. And right now, more than 1 year, since the February of 2015, I'm absolutely proud to tell you that we live in more or less stable macroeconomic situation. What we did else? We really clean up, first of all, from the beginning of this year, we switched to full-fledged inflation targeting monetary regime. Initially, it was even, maybe in 2014, it was very difficult even to imagine how we will do that in the beginning of 2016. That's why it's really a great success of the National Bank. And our level our inflation targets, maybe it will be for European bankers, it will be funny to hear right now what our inflation targets. But for us, for last year inflation was 40%. And that's why 40, it's not a mistake, 40, yeah. And 20% of this 40 were dedicated just to increase of regulated tariffs. That's why it's just a structural reform in our country. That's why it's nothing strange here. And 20% of last year inflation was dedicated to pass-through effect of this very high devaluation. Because, as I mentioned, we have a small and open economy. And That's why for us target for this year it's 12%. It's the target, and our forecast right now, it's already May, that we will we will have an inflation like 12%. That's why we still believe that we will reach our target. Next year target it's 8%, and in 2000 by the end of 2019 we'd like to reach 5% inflation, and we consider that it's an optimal level for Ukraine, because you know that inflation sometimes we also need inflation for our growth. That's why 5% inflation horizon in 3 years, it's our main target. And transition target for this year, it's a 12% inflation. And I believe that we will deliver this inflation. What else? Maybe it's time to tell you about what we did in the banking sector. First of all, we clean up Ukrainian banking sector. And you know that 73 banks, it's about more than 30% of Ukrainian banking system were sent for liquidation to our DGF fund. Of course, if we consider percentage-wise, it means that it's a pity that we lost 30% of Ukrainian banking system. But if we dig deeper to the inside of these banks, you could recognize that nothing, it's not a pity for anybody in our country, because unfortunately the biggest part of these banks were not banks, just money laundering machine or absolutely empty shelves. We call it zombie banks, or so-called oligarch banking, some oligarch banking structures, when all these oligarchs borrow money from private individuals and after build their empires based on this money, when all this and after when crisis appeared, of course they could not be ready to finance their banks, to recapitalize their banks. And that's why, you know, I think it was very good exercise for Ukrainian banking system that we clean up all of that. But because, you know, that all these devils which I mentioned to you happened with us, like annexion of Crimea, 3 times devaluation, annexion of eastern part of Ukraine, and also you could imagine what kind of real hit was for healthy part of Ukrainian banking system. That's why during our IMF negotiations with IMF, we agreed for absolutely unique structure of recapitalization of Ukrainian banks. And this structure, I will right now tell you about this structure. But believe me, before it was the first time we consider that zero capital is a good sign for healthy banks, and that's why end of 2015 the capital adequacy ratio which the central bank require from their bank, it's zero capital. But I'm really proud to tell you that zero capital, it's nothing, frankly speaking, dangerous. Because capital, it's, you know, it's just the idea how you calculate your risk-weighted assets. And capital is just a buffer for your wrong calculation. But because we did asset quality review of banks ourselves, we did stress test for biggest 20 banks, we knew exactly what does it mean, the right calculation of risk-weighted assets. Because it was not even, we did all these exercises not in a Basel III principles, we did it, I can tell you, at Basel IV principles, because Basel IV principle, it's equal for everybody, means that it's the same, absolutely the same methodology for all Ukrainian banks. And that's why I'm absolutely proud to tell you that when our banks reach zero capital, we know that their assets and liabilities absolutely in absolutely good shape. And of course, right now we need to build our buffers for future, of course, possible problems. That's why we agreed with IMF that to the end of this year, 5% capital adequacy will be required. Next year, 7% capital adequacy, and in 3 years, we will reach 10% capital adequacy. And frankly speaking, I am very proud that it's quite a unique exercise, but we implement it here in Ukraine. And what I'd like to tell you, it's about transformation of the central bank itself. It was absolutely incredible transformation, internal transformation of the central bank. But to transform central bank from this medieval monster to the modern central bank, it's not an easy exercise. And partially, I am very proud to tell you that we do. Not only because we cut 60% of our personnel. When I joined the central bank, it was 12,000, and right now it's just 5,000. Not only because we save the money of our taxpayers, because we saved about 7 billion hryvnia during the exercise when we sold or closed all our non-core assets. We closed 25 regional offices because they are not any longer needed. It's in the 21st century with the new means of communications, it's just a rudiment to have all these offices. Of course, we still have a cash in circulation, but we have very intensive program for so-called cash light economy or cashless economy, because our Swedish colleague from Swedish Central Bank, for us it's a role model how to what direction we should go with all this cash economy. And but we re-engineer all internal processes within the central bank. It was about 31 internal projects, re-engineering of all of that. That's why it's not just a cut of your personnel. But believe me, right now I have a more ambitious target because we discussed with you all this automation, and that's why I'd like to launch quite. But believe me, for this exercise, you need more time. You should be better prepared for all of that, and we are doing all of that. That's why today I will not disclose you how many personnel we would like to have in 3 years' time, but I believe that you will do. And I think my time is over. And what I'd like to tell you, we have absolutely unique opportunities these 2 days to discuss all these challenges which I counted. And from monetary policies issue to all this fintech, new technology, to profitability of the central banks, and to and other aspects, because all of that, it's the biggest part of any macroeconomic issue in the world. That's why I'm very happy to be with you all these 2 days. I will not leave. I already said to my staff that I'd like to stay with you and see all our discussion. Thank you very much.